What insane ways can the universe end you? Let's see. A dark night in the middle of winter. A friend and I had promised a mutual friend that we would turn up by 10 p.m. It was already 8, and we had 200 miles still to go. The narrow road wound treacherously through a massive forest. Trees the size of Godzilla's back scratcher lined the path. I was driving a tinfoil junk box designed for delicate little jaunts around the city on its best day, and it did not like this overgrown country road one bit. I'd been driving for 13 hours straight. The only breaks had been to pull through McDonald's drive-thrus and order extra-large Jumbo Cokes for the caffeine. I was wired as heck, and we had a deadline to meet. The road was dark, silent. There had been no traffic in either direction for hours. There were certainly no cops. The limit was about 65 miles per hour. We weren't going to make it. Darn that. The speedo started creeping upwards, the feeble light of my underpowered headlights barely penetrating the gloom, even in the highest setting. We were doing 70, 75, 80, 85, and the tortuous twists of the blacktop through the trees started coming at me a little too fast. I took another gulp of caffeine, and the distance and remaining time danced in front of me. 90. The trees were a blur. The road was alive and trying to get away from me. The car shuddered and groaned. 95, and I no longer had the capacity for thought. There was only the unforgiving wooden blur and the tarmac jumping like a cut snake, and my knuckles on the wheel. I was steering by telepathy. By the time anything appeared in the headlights, it would already be too late to react. The engine screamed and the speedo paused, then climbed, triple digits. The car was never built for this. Nowhere in the Korean factory it rolled out of was there ever a spec that said, must be able to be drive through the forest in the night at insane speeds by a possibly equally insane Australian. Equally, there was no entry for must be able to keep this up for 2 hours without coming apart at the seams. For 2 hours, the car was a loosely allied collection of parts hurtling down the blacktop, possibly only because the bolts were more afraid of coming off at this speed than they were of hanging on for a grim end. I did not notice the hours passing. I could not. I was reduced to hands on the wheel, and whatever Jedi sense was keeping us from sudden, instant, splintery eradication mere meters away. Our destination, unheeded, crept nearer. And then whipping around a bend, it came upon a kangaroo, and the car went airborne. Oh, crap! The car tumbled down the road. The steering wheel I was gripping hurt my palms as the wheels, locked far to one side, turned the car around and relaunched it towards the center line. We leapt, and now the scenery was going by at 45 degrees. I blindly twisted the wheel in the other direction. The 5-door lawn dart splashed on bitumen again and slewed back in its original direction. The shocks groaned and shuddered, all the door lights flickered, and the car somehow miraculously righted itself and hurled down the highway. Oh, we made it to our friend's place on time. That was the weekend I had to call my boss on Monday and say, I can't come in today, I'm in Queensland. Damn, it felt like I was reading a novel or something. Story 2. I was running late to help my parents move house and decided to grab some McDonald's to eat in the car while driving. Cruising down the highway at 100 kilometers per hour, I got the feeling that you get in your chest when you swallow a lump of food. It was uncomfortable, but I could still breathe. All of a sudden, I got the, oh crap, I'm about to pass out feeling. My vision pixelated, colors drained away, I lost peripheral vision. There was a buzzing sound in my ears. At the time, I was driving around a big, sweeping right-hand bend in light traffic in the lane closest to the middle of the road, so I couldn't even quickly pull over. All I remember is saying to myself, whatever happens, make sure you hold on to the wheel. Then it faded out. Fade in, bumping along in the car. I could see rocks, trees, grass, and a field, and distinctly recall thinking, oh, we're out for a drive in the country. That's nice. I like the country. Then it faded out again. Fade in again. Yep, driving in the country. Wait, is that a steering... Oh God, the steering wheel. I'm supposed to be driving. At that precise moment, the car came to a halt. My first response, still in a daze, I guess, was trying to reverse out of there, but I couldn't do it. At this point, I started to realize what had happened. Where the road curved to the right, I peeled off to the left and just happened to go into a fairly empty field. I say fairly empty because in the 100 meters or so between the road and where I am, I'd taken out a large wooden post, a small tree, and 4 or 5 metal star posts, the remainder of an old fence. There was not a straight panel left in the car, except the back of it, and I was completely unharmed. The car was a write-off. Since this incident, which was around 10 years ago now, and a few more similar ones, thankfully not involving cars, I have a very strict rule about not eating while driving anymore. I have learned that I have something called a Schatzi ring and quite possibly also suffer from a rare condition known as swallowing syncope. I'm going to see my doctor in the next few weeks for a proper diagnosis and discussion of what to do about it. Story 3. A couple of years ago, I was living in Delaware and had to take an afternoon flight to San Francisco from New York to meet up with my then-girlfriend. So the day before the flight, I went to NYC to stay with a friend, figuring I'd work from his apartment in the morning and take a cab in the afternoon to JFK. I got to NYC, we met up for dinner, and walking back to his apartment, he told me that his bathroom door handle was broken, so no matter what, not to close the door when I go in because there was no way to open it. And what did I do? The moment we walked in, even though my mind was telling me not to close the door, muscle memory took over and the door slammed shut. It took him the better part of an hour to open it using a combination of a screwdriver, pliers, and tape. His choice of words for me was well-deserved that night. The next morning, he left for work and I started working. Around 2 p.m., I decided to take a quick shower before heading out at 3 p.m. As thoughts whirled in my head of meeting my girlfriend after 2 months and the fun things we'd do over the weekend, I closed the bathroom door again. Tears welled up in my eyes, for I knew there was no way I was getting out until my friend came back in and let me out again. And of course, I would miss my flight and a long weekend with my girl. As I sat there contemplating my fate and thinking of escaping out the bathroom window, I saw his plunger. And then, driven by a caveman urge, I broke the door handle and I practically ran outside, collapsing in a heap in the bed. I didn't shower that afternoon. I left $100 for my friend to fix the lock. I made my flight back to my girlfriend. I wouldn't have done it any other way. Story 4. While watching a movie, a freak ice storm happened, and all the roads became treacherous. I was 18 and had just purchased my first car. I wasn't a terrible driver, but I didn't have much experience driving in poor conditions. It was like midnight, and I had to be up early the next day, so I took a deep breath and went on my way. I was driving about 15 miles under the speed limit, skidding to a halt at every traffic light and stop sign. Around me, other cars were off the road. To get home, I had to take a highway and got really nervous as I merged into the lane. The highway was 55 miles per hour, and everyone was cruising at about 60. I tried to keep my speed at 40 because of how slippery it was, but every time I slowed down, someone started tailgating me. Finally, I just decided to keep up with traffic, even though the further I went, the more cars there were off the road. The highway I was on eventually broke up into 3 separate routes, each with a steady lane and a passing lane. As I was in the cruising lane of my route being tailgated, I saw a tow truck just chilling in the lane about 200 feet ahead of me. I knew I didn't have a lot of time, so at 50 miles per hour, I jerked the wheel and went to the passing lane. Only I didn't stay put. I kept sliding out in front of other cars headed toward the other routes in the lane. I skidded in front of a truck enough to miss getting rear-ended, but I also started spinning. I ended up in the last lane about an inch from the guardrail. Luckily, there were no cars in that lane. After catching my breath, ensuring I didn't get scared and attempting to no avail to stop shaking, I proceeded on my way and continued home at 25 miles an hour, with my hazards on the highway. The next day, I learned that there were 3 separate and serious traffic-related incidents the night before. Story 5. My girlfriend and I were driving to Vegas from San Francisco in a rental car. We were visiting the country. Anyway, we were 30 miles along at around 6 p.m. when I realized we probably wouldn't have enough gas to make it to the next gas station, which was roughly 100 miles away. So after driving for another half hour or so, the blinking lights came on, indicating we were on reserve fuel. My girlfriend started freaking out because her cell phones had no service. There wasn't anyone we knew to call anyway, so we stopped at the deserted RV park in the middle of the way to try to get some help, all the while genuinely fearing for our lives. So anyway, the place was devoid of people, so we continued driving in reserve towards BDNV. Eventually, the car ground to a halt and we ended up having to pull over to get help. We tried flagging down cars for 45 minutes to no avail, until finally some truck that passed us suddenly pulled over and backed up to us. I explained our predicament to him and begged him to drive us to Beatty and back. But this time it was dark, and the guy, a friendly-looking Latino dude, sensed we were really desperate and did us the favor. When we actually got to the gas station in Beatty, my girlfriend was so relieved that she started crying. I proceeded to buy a 2-gallon watering can and fill it up with gas. Later, the guy drove us all the way back, roughly 40 miles there and back, to our car. At this point, I was so grateful that I offered him $200, to which he flat out refused and even offered to tail us to Beatty in case we ran out of gas again. We managed to get to Vegas in the end after being on the road for about 14 hours, but this incident really shook us but also reminded us that there truly are good Samaritans out there. Story 6. So I was driving with my son to meet my boyfriend's friend at the time. We were maybe a mile from my house. I was about to drive through the green light, which had been green, and as I entered the intersection, the car on the other side decided that would be a great time to pull in front of me to turn onto the highway. I tried to brake, but I felt the car skidding and remembered that I was about to pass over a bridge, so it was probably the best idea to stop the car. I tried to tap the brakes to keep it from skidding and managed to hit the outside of the guardrail and get the car down to the hill to some trees. Here's the thing. According to the car behind me, my car went up 2 wheels and almost flipped, but I managed to keep that from happening. I was told by the cops that had I turned the car too much, I would have been T-boned by the car that was in the lane over from me. Also, had I turned too much, I would have gone into the trees. On top of that, the wood of the guardrail that I hit was moist on the inside, so I hit it enough to slow me down, but then it snapped, essentially preventing the car from being damaged enough to be dangerous. Yeah, I'm thankful no one got hurt. The universe certainly has tricks up its sleeve to remind us how fragile we are. If you're enjoying the content so far, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more wild rides like these. Story 7. I'm a private pilot. One time I was nearing the airport to land. I hit the switch to put the landing gear down and only 2 lights showed up, indicating that the 2 main gears were down, but the nose gear was not coming down. So if all else failed, I would either have to raise the gear and do a belly landing or do a landing with only 2 gears, which would be even more dangerous. But first, I went back away from the airport to try to work out the problem, if possible. I tried raising the gear and re-lowering it. Same thing. 2 lights, but no nose gear. Because the gear came down from the force of gravity, I tried pulling a few G's to force it down. Nothing. I tried wiggling the rudder since the turning mechanism is connected to the nose gear. Nothing. Maybe a few more G's. Nothing. Finally, I remembered what the instructor had told me in passing when I was getting checked out of the particular aircraft. The lights for the gear are interchangeable, so if one is worn out, you can switch them around. So I went to switch them just in case the nose gear light went out. As soon as I touched the light to change it, it came on. In the end, the light wasn't all the way in the socket, and that's what the problem was. I did a low pass over the tower so they could visually check just to be sure. Landed successfully in the end. Story 8. I once studied abroad in Cyprus, and during Thanksgiving break, I decided to go to Spain for the week. No one else wanted to go, so I went alone. It was incredible. I saw Madrid, Toledo, Sevilla, Granada, and Barcelona in that order. I was supposed to take a bus back to Madrid to catch my flight back to Cyprus the next day. When I got to the bus station with all my luggage to take the last bus of the night at around midnight, I noticed my wallet had been stolen. I had it when I got on the subway, so between getting on the subway and 10 minutes later, when I got off and walked to the bus station, someone took it from me. My cash, debit card, and credit card were all stolen. I had no way of making purchases. My prepaid phone was out of minutes. I was effectively homeless in a foreign country. I went to the nearest bar when I told the bartender my story. He drove me back to his place after his shift ended at 3 a.m. He looked up the next available train and gave me 150 euros, or around $200, to pay for the train, subway tickets, and food. He drove me to the train station. I got on the train and made my flight the next day. I've since wired him back his money. If it weren't for his kindness, I would be living in the streets of Barcelona begging for change. Well, that restored my faith in humanity a little bit. Story 9. I suppose this is less the universe saying joke lol and more my friend and I being freaking dumb. My friend A was dating this girl way out in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place in the middle of miles and miles of fields, only accessible by dirt roads with 30 feet of trees on either side. When you were driving there at night, it was dark. He also had this van, which she appropriately named Big Brown. It was old, rusty, a piece of trash, and had nearly bald tires. But we drove it anyway, jumped it wherever we could, and peeled out typical senior in high school nonsense. We were driving from his girlfriend's place one night, doing about 60 to 70 miles per hour on the dirt road. We see this flashing yellow light near the center of the road. This isn't really cause for alarm because at every mile, crossroads intersect. Picture a giant grid. That's how these roads were laid out. And a flashing yellow traffic light is usually at each one. As we're squinting and trying to figure out what the heck this is, because it's quickly apparent that it's not a traffic light, we see it. It's a black semi parked facing us, with its flashers on, and the left one is out. He swerves at the last minute and we avoid running head-on into a semi doing 70 miles per hour. At the time, we thought it was hilarious just how close we came. Story 10. When I was about 15, I took a trip to Vermont with my grandparents and my similarly aged cousin. We decided to go in one of those scenic overlooks nearby, which turned out to be a 50-foot-tall waterfall. Scenic overlooks not being our thing, my cousin and I decided to ditch the geezers and climb around behind the fall to check out the view from the top. We made it up there and grabbed onto a tree, waving our arms madly and catching the attention of the old folks. At the same moment they glanced up, my cousin went toward the falls. I grabbed him but ended up falling into the water myself. As the rushing water carried me towards what I assumed to be imminent danger, my right foot got caught between a couple of rocks, and the water pushed me upright. I found myself standing not 15 feet from the edge of the falls. With my grandparents in plain sight, I started yelling at them to take my picture. At that point, I was almost literally panicking. I don't know if anyone else has seen their grandmother screaming in utter terror, but I honestly hope not. My cousin pulled me out with a large branch a few months later, and we were in serious trouble. Story 11. I was once young and fairly foolish. My friends and I loved to play on construction sites. Many of the neighborhoods in the area I grew up in were just being developed. Anyway, we were messing around and saw these dump trucks dumping a lot of black dirt, topsoil for lawns. So we were playing in the dirt piles, being little rascals when a truck backed up and dumped a full truckload of dirt right on me. Even as a little nerd, I understood the immediate, overpowering urge to get out now. I was running and scrambling on this moving dirt pile, trying to reach the edge before it got me completely. When the dirt stopped pouring, I immediately felt my friend's hand clawing the dirt away, and it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I now understand the reason why people panic and whatnot in disasters. I don't like to think about it, but I probably would have made drastic measures. I was so overcome with a singular thought: survive. Sounds like this incident really changed his outlook on life. Story 12. I was studying abroad on a cruise ship, the semester at sea program, crossing the Pacific in the middle of winter, spent about a week pitching and rolling on 30 to 40-foot waves. It wasn't common for it to pitch 45 degrees to the right only to get tossed back 45 degrees to the left. At one point we got caught between two bad storms and were hit with a rogue wave. It was over 80 feet high and broke the windows on the bridge and caused some electrical issues that stopped our engines. There was tremendous damage to the rest of the ship. I was sleeping at the time and my bed made a hole in the wall. We prepared to abandon ship into lifeboats. I knew that we were all in danger if we did that, as the Coast Guard was about a day out and there was no way the lifeboats would survive the rough waters. Literally, as we were getting ready to go out on deck and board the lifeboats, one of the engines started working again and we didn't have to evacuate. We literally zigzagged our way to Hawaii and spent 2 weeks chilling while the boat was repaired. Story 13. Taking a trip through the mountains with my now ex-wife in the biggest POS car we'd ever owned. We were about 4 hours from home when the brakes failed. Thankfully, the car was a 5-speed manual, so I started shifting down to slow down. While coasting through a small town, I spotted an auto parts store. I judged it just right and pulled in, using the building to finally stop the car. It was a very gentle tap. I then proceeded to jack the rear of the car up and investigate. The rear brakes were completely useless, including the wheel cylinders. I went into the store and bought what I needed for repairs, new brake shoes, cylinder rebuild kits, and some brake fluid. Then I proceeded to do a brake job in my car with nothing more than a Leatherman and a full-size flat-tip screwdriver. This was a mom-and-pop parts store, no loaner tools. I was back on the road within the hour. I guess this was more of a screw you universe story. What a bunch of insane ways the universe can totally ruin your day. If you love a good adrenaline rush, you've got to watch What Made You Say, "Yep, this is the end," but survived without any major injuries. Story 1 is pretty much dumb luck. See you there.